Their eyes met through the glass, and Sarah watched understanding dawn on David's face, the shock, the confusion, the hurt. He didn't yell. When she stumbled into the kitchen wrapped in a towel that wasn't hers, her hair wet, her face flushed with guilt, he just stood there looking at her like she was a stranger. "How long?" His voice was quiet, eerily calm. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the weight of her betrayal crashed over her, knowing that no explanation could undo this moment. No words could rebuild what she'd destroyed in her desperate pursuit of something she couldn't even name. Sarah stretched beneath the cotton sheets, her eyes adjusting to the soft amber glow filtering through the bedroom blinds. The familiar sound of the espresso machine humming downstairs told her that David was already awake, preparing their morning ritual as he had for the past 8 years. She smiled, sliding out of bed and padding barefoot across the cool hardwood floor. The kitchen smelled of fresh espresso and cinnamon rolls warming in the oven. David stood at the counter, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he scrolled through the morning headlines on his tablet. He looked up when she entered, his face breaking into the warm smile that had first captured her heart nearly a decade ago. "Morning, beautiful," he said, pouring her usual cappuccino into the ceramic mug she'd brought back from their honeymoon in Italy. "You're spoiling me again," Sarah replied, accepting the mug and breathing in the rich aroma. She kissed his cheek, feeling the familiar stubble that he'd shaved before leaving for the office. Their life together had settled into a comfortable rhythm. David worked as a senior accountant at a downtown firm, leaving each morning at 7:30 sharp. Sarah worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, her office tucked into what had once been a spare bedroom. They had dinner together every evening, took weekend trips to the farmer's market, and talked about someday starting a family. As Sarah settled at the kitchen table with her coffee, she gazed through the large bay window that overlooked their backyard. The morning sun illuminated the flower beds she'd carefully tended, the bird bath where cardinals came to drink, and beyond their white picket fence, the house next door. The neighboring property had stood vacant for nearly 4 months. The elderly couple who'd lived there had relocated to Arizona for retirement, and the house had languished on the market through winter. But this morning, something was different. A sleek black SUV sat in the driveway. The front door stood open, and Sarah could see movement inside. As she watched, a woman emerged carrying a potted plant. She was strikingly attractive, perhaps in her early 30s, with auburn hair that cascaded past her shoulders. She wore yoga pants and a fitted tank top despite the cool April morning. "David, look," Sarah said, nodding toward the window. "The house sold." David joined her at the table, peering through the window. A man appeared behind the woman, tall and athletic, with sandy blonde hair. He carried what looked like a rolled-up rug over one shoulder, moving with easy confidence. "About time," David said. "That place was becoming an eyesore. Maybe we'll get some decent neighbors. Want to go over later this week and introduce ourselves?" "Sure," Sarah agreed, though something about the couple made her hesitate. They seemed so different from the quiet elderly neighbors who'd lived there before. David glanced at his watch. "I should get going. Conference call with the Seattle office at 8:30. He kissed her forehead, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the door. "Love you." "Love you too," Sarah called after him. She remained at the table, nursing her cappuccino as she continued to observe the activity next door. More furniture appeared, modern pieces in chrome and leather, abstract artwork, and what looked like expensive electronics. The couple seemed to be doing most of the moving themselves, working together with an easy familiarity that spoke of a close relationship. The woman caught Sarah's eye and waved enthusiastically. Caught off guard, Sarah waved back, feeling a flush of embarrassment at being noticed. The woman smiled and returned inside. Sarah shook her head, trying to clear the strange flutter in her chest. They were just new neighbors, nothing remarkable about that. She had work to do and a deadline approaching for a restaurant's new menu design. But throughout the morning, as she tried to focus on her computer screen, her eyes kept drifting to the window, watching the couple transform the empty house into their home. The next 3 days passed in a blur of normalcy. Sarah met her deadline, had lunch with a former college roommate, and attended her Thursday yoga class. David worked late on Tuesday preparing quarterly reports. Everything continued as it always had. But Sarah found her attention increasingly drawn to the house next door. The new neighbors had wasted no time settling in. She'd noticed that they seemed to keep unusual hours, often still awake when she and David went to bed, lights blazing from their windows late into the night. On Thursday afternoon, while taking a break from designing a logo for a new bakery, Sarah walked to the kitchen to refill her water glass. The window provided a clear view of the neighbor's backyard, and what she saw made her pause. They'd uncovered the swimming pool. The previous owners had kept it covered year-round, considering themselves too old to maintain it properly. But now the blue water sparkled invitingly in the spring sunshine. The woman, whom Sarah had started thinking of as the auburn-haired neighbor, reclined on a lounge chair wearing a tiny red bikini and oversized sunglasses. The man was doing laps, his powerful strokes cutting through the water with athletic precision. Sarah found herself watching, glass forgotten in her hand. There was something captivating about the way they moved, so comfortable in their bodies, so unself-conscious. The woman stood and dove gracefully into the pool, surfacing beside her partner. They embraced in the water, laughing about something Sarah couldn't hear. A wave of something unfamiliar washed over Sarah. Was it envy? Longing? She couldn't quite name the feeling, but it left her unsettled. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered to herself, forcing her eyes away from the window. She returned to her office, determined to focus on work. That evening, David came home with flowers, a spontaneous gesture that touched her. They made dinner together, sharing stories from their day. Sarah almost mentioned the neighbors in the pool, but something held her back. It seemed too trivial to bring up, yet somehow too significant to discuss casually. Friday morning arrived bright and clear. David had an early tea time with clients, golf being an essential part of his networking strategy. He left before dawn, and Sarah found herself alone with her coffee in the quiet house. She told herself she wouldn't look. She had plenty of work to do, emails to answer, a new project proposal to write. But when 10 o'clock came and went, she found herself in the kitchen, ostensibly to make a snack, her eyes drawn inexorably to the window. The neighbors were in the pool again, but this time something was different. As Sarah watched, frozen in place, she realized they weren't wearing swimsuits. They moved through the water with complete freedom, their bodies visible beneath the surface, laughing and playing like children on a summer day. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She should look away. This was private, intimate. She was intruding on a moment not meant for her eyes. But she didn't look away. She stood there transfixed as the couple swam and embraced, seemingly without a care in the world. They appeared so liberated, so completely at ease with themselves and each other. It was unlike anything she'd experienced in her own carefully ordered life. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, Sarah forced herself to step back from the window. Her hands were shaking. Her face felt hot. What was wrong with her? She was a married woman, happily married, watching her neighbors in a moment they clearly believed to be private. She tried to return to work, but concentration proved impossible. The images from the window played on repeat in her mind. Not just what she'd seen, but the feeling it evoked, a sensation of possibility, a freedom from invisible constraints she'd never acknowledged before. That weekend, David suggested they finally go introduce themselves to the new neighbors. Sarah's stomach dropped at the suggestion, but she couldn't think of a reasonable objection. Saturday afternoon found them standing on the neighbor's porch, Sarah clutching a homemade banana bread she'd baked that morning. David rang the doorbell, and Sarah held her breath. The door opened. The auburn-haired woman stood there in cut-off denim shorts and a loose linen shirt, her feet bare. Up close, she was even more striking, with high cheekbones and unusual amber-colored eyes. "Hi there," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "You must be the neighbors. I'm Jennifer, but everyone calls me Jen. Come in, please." Her partner appeared behind her, extending his hand to David. "I'm Marcus. Great to finally meet you both." The interior of their house was nothing like Sarah had expected. While modern, it had a warm bohemian feel, with plants everywhere, colorful artwork on the walls, and comfortable furniture arranged to encourage conversation. Incense burned somewhere, filling the air with sandalwood. Jen insisted they sit, immediately offering wine, despite it being only 3 in the afternoon. Marcus joined them with a bottle of white wine from their extensive collection, which occupied an entire wall of built-in shelving. "We're wine enthusiasts," he explained with a grin, among other things. The conversation flowed easily. Marcus and Jen had moved from the city, seeking a quieter lifestyle, they said. Marcus was a photographer, mostly commercial work but with aspirations for fine art. Jen taught yoga and meditation classes online, building a following through social media. "We work from home too," Jen said, her eyes on Sarah. "It's wonderful, isn't it? The freedom to structure your own day." "It has its advantages," Sarah agreed, though she couldn't help feeling that Jen's version of working from home involved considerably more flexibility than her own deadline-driven schedule. David and Marcus fell into easy conversation about sports and cars. Jen turned her full attention to Sarah, and Sarah felt the intensity of that gaze like a physical touch. "How long have you two been married?" asked Jen. 8 years next month. That's beautiful. Marcus and I have been together 6 years, married for 3. She paused, swirling her wine. "You know what I think is important? Never letting that spark die. So many couples get comfortable and forget to keep things exciting." Sarah's cheeks warmed. "We have date nights," she offered. Jen smiled, a knowing expression that made Sarah feel both young and naive. "That's a start." After an hour, David stood to leave, thanking them for their hospitality. As they said their goodbyes, Jen hugged Sarah, her embrace lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "Come visit any time," Jen said. "I mean it. I'd love to get to know you better." Walking back to their own house, David seemed energized by the encounter. "They're interesting people, different from our usual circle, but nice." "Yes," Sarah agreed quietly. "Very different." The following week began normally enough. David left for work each morning, Sarah attacked her projects with renewed focus, and life proceeded along its familiar tracks. But everything felt subtly different now, as though the world had shifted slightly on its axis. Sarah found herself thinking about Jen and Marcus at odd moments, the way they'd decorated their home with such personality, how they'd spoken about their work with passion rather than obligation, the casual intimacy between them that seemed so effortless. On Tuesday afternoon, while Sarah was wrestling with a particularly challenging logo redesign, her doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment considered ignoring it, but curiosity won out. Jen stood on the porch, holding a covered dish and wearing a flowing sundress. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "I made too much pasta salad and thought you might enjoy some." "Oh, that's so thoughtful," Sarah said, accepting the dish. "Would you like to come in?" "I'd love to." They settled in Sarah's kitchen, and Sarah found herself making tea, something she hadn't done for a guest in months. Jen moved through the space with the same easy confidence she showed everywhere, admiring Sarah's herb garden on the windowsill and the framed photographs on the walls. "You have a beautiful home," Jen said. "Very orderly." Sarah wasn't sure if that was a compliment. "I like things organized." "Nothing wrong with that." Jen accepted the teacup, cradling it in both hands. "But sometimes the mess is where life happens, you know?" They talked for over an hour. Jen had a way of asking questions that invited honest answers, and before long, Sarah found herself sharing things she'd rarely spoken about. Her frustration with demanding clients, her occasional loneliness working from home, her vague sense that life was passing her by while she waited for something undefined to happen. "You should come to one of my yoga classes," Jen suggested. "I teach 3 times a week. Very low-key, very welcoming." "I already take yoga on Thursdays." "At the studio downtown? I know that place. Very rigid, very focused on perfect form." Jen leaned forward. "My classes are different. They're about connecting with yourself, releasing what holds you back, finding freedom in movement. Sarah felt something stir inside her, a yearning she couldn't quite name. Maybe I'll try it sometime. Come tomorrow, 10 a.m. I teach in our backyard when the weather's nice. Jen's amber eyes held Sarah's gaze. Bring your mat. No judgment, no pressure. Just breath and movement and honesty. After Jen left, Sarah stood in her kitchen, the pasta salad forgotten on the counter. She felt off balance, as though the conversation had opened a door she hadn't known existed. That night, David mentioned he'd be working late the rest of the week, preparing for a major audit. Sarah nodded, barely registering the information. Her mind was already elsewhere, thinking about tomorrow morning. Sarah woke Wednesday morning with butterflies in her stomach. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with second thoughts. What was she doing? It was just a yoga class, perfectly innocent. But something about the way Jen had looked at her, the unspoken promise in those amber eyes, suggested it was more than that. David left early, kissing her forehead absently as she pretended to sleep. When his car disappeared down the street, Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, having a silent argument with herself. This is ridiculous. It's yoga, not a crime. But it feels like something more. You're overthinking. Jenna's just being friendly. Is she? At 9:45, Sarah found herself pulling on her yoga pants and tank top. She grabbed her mat from the closet, rolled it under her arm, and walked across her backyard to the gate that separated her property from Jen and Marcus's. Her hand trembled as she opened the gate. The backyard had been transformed. Soft music played from hidden speakers, incense burned in decorative holders placed around the patio. Jen had rolled out her own mat near the pool, and Sarah noticed a second mat had been placed beside it. "You came," Jen said, smiling as though she'd never doubted it. She wore minimal clothing, just a sports bra and tiny shorts. "I'm so glad." Marcus sat at a nearby table, working on his laptop, but he looked up and waved. "Morning, Sarah." The class began gently enough. Jen guided Sarah through familiar poses, her voice soothing and encouraging. But as the session progressed, Jen moved closer, adjusting Sarah's positions with gentle hands, her touch lingering longer than necessary. "Let go," Jen whispered during a particularly challenging balance pose. "Stop thinking and just feel." Sarah tried. She tried to empty her mind, to focus only on breath and movement. But she was acutely aware of Jen's proximity, the warmth of her body, the scent of her skin. After an hour, they finished in savasana, lying flat on their backs. Sarah's body felt loose and energized simultaneously. She'd never experienced yoga quite like this, not a workout, but a kind of meditation, a surrender. "Beautiful work," Jen said, sitting up and regarding Sarah with approval. "You're a natural when you let yourself be free." Marcus had abandoned his laptop and was swimming laps in the pool. As Sarah watched, he pulled himself out of the water, and she realized with a start that he was naked. Her face must have shown her shock because Jen laughed, a musical sound. "We're very comfortable with our bodies," she said simply. "It's liberating, not being constrained by society's arbitrary rules about what's acceptable." Sarah should have left then, should have grabbed her mat, thanked Jen politely, and returned to her own safe, orderly house. But she didn't. "Stay for a while," Jen suggested. "Have some juice. Relax by the pool." And Sarah stayed. They sat in lounge chairs, sipping fresh squeezed orange juice that Marcus had prepared. The conversation wandered from topic to topic: travel, books, philosophy, dreams deferred. Jen spoke about freedom like it was tangible, something you could choose at any moment. Most people build their own cages. They create all these rules for themselves, these limitations, and then wonder why they feel trapped. Some rules are important. They provide structure, stability. Do they? Or do they just make you feel safe while you're slowly suffocating? The words struck something deep inside Sarah. How long had she felt like she was suffocating without even realizing it? When Sarah finally returned home, it was nearly 1 in the afternoon. She'd been next door for over 3 hours. David had sent 2 text messages checking in, and she'd answered them with casual lies about running errands. That night, lying beside David in bed, Sarah felt like a stranger in her own skin. Nothing had happened, nothing inappropriate, just yoga and conversation and juice by the pool. But everything had changed. The next few weeks passed in a haze. Sarah continued her work, met her deadlines, maintained the appearance of normal life, but increasingly her thoughts revolved around the house next door. She attended Jen's yoga classes 3 times a week. Each session felt like descending deeper into something she didn't fully understand but couldn't resist. Jen's teachings became more intimate, more focused on releasing inhibitions and embracing natural desires. Marcus was often present, sometimes participating, sometimes just watching with an amused expression. Sarah grew accustomed to their casual nudity, their comfortable displays of affection, the way they moved through life unencumbered by shame. David noticed her distraction but attributed it to work stress. She let him believe it, grateful for his trust even as she betrayed it with her thoughts, if not yet with her actions. One Thursday afternoon, after yoga, Jen made a suggestion that should have sent Sarah running. "You should try the pool," Jen said. "The water's perfect today." "I didn't bring a suit." Jen's smile was knowing. "Neither did we." Sarah's heart hammered. This was the moment, the clear line between acceptable and unacceptable, the boundary she'd been approaching in careful increments. "I can't," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because—" But she couldn't articulate the why. Because she was married? But marriage didn't preclude swimming. Because it would be naked? But the body was natural, nothing to be ashamed of. Because it felt like the beginning of something she wouldn't be able to stop? That felt closest to the truth. "No pressure," Jen said gently. "The offer stands whenever you're ready." Sarah went home that day determined to create distance. She would stop attending the yoga classes, stop visiting next door, rebuild the boundaries she'd allowed to erode. But Friday morning, she was back at the gate at 10 a.m. And this time, when Jen extended the invitation, Sarah said yes. The water was warmer than Sarah expected, heated by the unseasonably hot late spring sun. She'd slipped off her clothing with trembling hands, moving quickly before she could change her mind, and entered the pool in a rush that left no time for second-guessing. The sensation was overwhelming, the water against her bare skin, the freedom of movement, the sunlight on her shoulders. She felt simultaneously exposed and liberated, vulnerable and powerful. Jen and Marcus swam nearby, giving her space to adjust, but their presence was a constant reminder of what she was doing. Not just swimming, but surrendering to something she'd resisted her entire adult life, the desire to break free from expectations and constraints. They swam for an hour. Conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences. Sarah felt the tension draining from her body, replaced by a strange euphoria. Was this how Jen and Marcus lived all the time, in this state of unfettered freedom? When she finally climbed out of the pool, reaching for the towel Jen had provided, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the sliding glass door. She barely recognized herself. Hair wet and wild, skin flushed, eyes bright with something that looked like awakening. "You have a beautiful home," she heard herself say, wrapping the towel around her body. "A beautiful life." "So could you," Jen replied. That evening, David came home tired from a long day. Sarah had made his favorite dinner, lasagna with garlic bread, and opened a bottle of wine. They ate and talked, and everything seemed normal. But Sarah was acting, playing the role of dutiful wife while her mind replayed the afternoon's events, while her skin still tingled with the memory of the water and the sun and the freedom. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay beside David, listening to his even breathing, and felt the weight of her deception crushing her. Nothing physical had happened with Jen or Marcus. No lines of fidelity had technically been crossed. But emotionally, she'd already left her marriage, bit by bit, day by day, swimming towards something new and unknown. What began as occasional visits became routine. Sarah's days developed a new rhythm. Work in the morning, yoga and swimming at Jen's house in the afternoon, home before David returned in the evening. She told herself she could stop any time. This was just friendship, just innocent recreation. But she knew she was lying to herself. Jen and Marcus never pushed her toward anything explicit, never made overt advances, but their entire lifestyle was an invitation to shed inhibitions, to question the rules she'd lived by, to want more from life than comfortable predictability. Sarah found herself researching their philosophy online. She discovered whole communities of people who lived this way, who believed in radical freedom and honesty and the rejection of societal constraints on pleasure and connection. Part of her was horrified. This wasn't who she was, wasn't how she'd been raised, wasn't compatible with the life she'd built. But another part of her, growing stronger each day, whispered, "But what if it is who you are? What if everything before was just pretending?" She began to resent David, though he'd done nothing wrong. His reliability felt like boredom. His predictability felt like stagnation. His contentment with their life felt like lack of imagination. It wasn't fair. She knew it wasn't fair, but resentment doesn't care about fairness. One Wednesday evening, David suggested they take a weekend trip to the mountains, something they'd done every summer for years. Sarah agreed, but her enthusiasm was forced. All she could think was that a weekend away meant 2 days without visiting next door. The trip was pleasant. They hiked familiar trails, had dinner at their favorite restaurant, made love in the rustic cabin they'd rented. David seemed happy, oblivious to Sarah's internal turmoil. But Sunday evening, driving home, Sarah felt her pulse quicken as they approached their neighborhood. She was eager to get back, not to her own house, but to the one next door. "Nice to get away," David said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "We should do this more often." Sarah agreed, noncommittally. Monday morning, she was at Jen's gate at 10 sharp. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in early June. David had mentioned that morning he'd be working late, possibly not home until after 9. The audit was entering its final phase, requiring extra hours. Sarah barely registered the information. She was already thinking about her afternoon plans. The day was hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the pavement. Sarah finished a conference call with a client at noon and changed into her swimsuit, though lately she'd been foregoing it, growing comfortable with Jen and Marcus's approach. She arrived at their house to find them already in the pool. The routine had become so established that she didn't bother announcing herself anymore, just let herself through the gate and joined them. They swam for a while, then lounged in the sun, talking about everything and nothing. Time seemed to move differently here, slower and faster simultaneously. Sarah had lost track of how long she'd been there when she heard a sound that made her blood freeze, the distinctive rumble of David's car engine. Her eyes shot to her watch. 4:30. He'd said he'd be late. He should still be at the office. Panic flooded her system. She grabbed for her towel, her mind racing. But it was too late. Through the fence slats, she could see David's car pulling into their driveway. "Oh, God," she whispered. Jen and Marcus exchanged a glance, but neither seemed particularly concerned. This wasn't their emergency. Sarah wrapped the towel around herself and ran for the gate, her wet feet slipping on the hot concrete. She needed to get home, needed to shower, needed to look normal before David came looking for her. But as she burst through her own back door, she saw him standing in the kitchen, visible through the window, staring directly at Jen and Marcus's backyard. At her. Their eyes met through the glass, and Sarah watched understanding dawn on David's face. The shock, the confusion, the hurt. He didn't yell. When she stumbled into the kitchen, wrapped in a towel that wasn't hers, her hair wet, her face flushed with guilt, he just stood there, looking at her like she was a stranger. "David," she started, but what could she say? What explanation existed that wouldn't make this worse? "How long?" His voice was quiet, eerily calm. "It's not what you think. Nothing happened." "How long?" Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "A few weeks, but I swear nothing physical." "You're standing in our kitchen wearing someone else's towel, Sarah. You're dripping pool water on our floor. You think I'm stupid?" Did you sleep with them?" "No, I told you, nothing." "Then what? What exactly have you been doing over there while I've been working to support us?" The accusation in his voice, the pain beneath his anger, broke something inside her. "I've been feeling alive. For the first time in years, I've been feeling like myself." David's face contorted. "This is yourself, sneaking around, lying to me, spending your days with our neighbors who—" He stopped, seemed to gather himself. "I saw them, Sarah. I know what you've been doing." "Swimming? Talking? Doing yoga? Naked." The word hung in the air between them. "It's not sexual," Sarah tried to explain. "It's about freedom, about not being bound by—" "Don't." David held up his hand. "Don't you dare try to make this about philosophy or liberation or whatever bullshit they've been feeding you. You lied to me. Every day you looked me in the eye and lied." She was right. She had no defense. "I need you to leave," David said finally. "Go to your sister's, go to a hotel, I don't care, but I can't look at you right now." "David, please." "Get out, Sarah." She went upstairs and packed a bag, her hands shaking so badly she could barely zip it closed. When she came back down, David was on the phone with someone, his brother maybe, or his lawyer already. She wanted to say something, anything that might make this better, but what words existed for this kind of betrayal? Sarah walked out of the house she'd lived in for 8 years, leaving behind her marriage, her life, everything she'd thought she wanted. And as she drove away, she couldn't help glancing at Jen and Marcus's house one last time.
The divorce took 3 months to finalize. David was businesslike about it, communicating only through lawyers, dividing their assets with cold efficiency. Sarah moved into a small apartment across town. She kept working, kept meeting deadlines, kept functioning. But she felt hollowed out, like something essential had been scooped out of her chest. Jen reached out a few times in the early weeks, but Sarah didn't respond. She couldn't face them, couldn't acknowledge the role they'd played in the destruction of her marriage, even though she knew, deep down, that they were merely catalysts for something already broken inside her. She went to therapy. Her counselor, a patient woman in her 60s, helped Sarah understand that she'd been seeking escape, not freedom, that real liberation came from honest communication and personal growth, not from running toward novelty while destroying what mattered. "You can't blame your neighbors," the therapist said during one session. "They didn't make you lie to your husband. They didn't force you to make those choices." "I know," Sarah whispered. "But you can recognize that you were vulnerable, searching for something, and they represented an easy answer to hard questions." By fall, Sarah had started to rebuild. She reconnected with old friends she'd neglected. She took a pottery class. She started running again, something she'd loved in college but abandoned over the years. She even began dating, though nothing serious. The men she met seemed nice enough, but she wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. One October afternoon, Sarah ran into a former neighbor at the grocery store, someone from the old neighborhood. After some awkward small talk, the woman mentioned, "Did you hear about that couple that moved in after you left?" Sarah's stomach tightened. "Jen and Marcus?" "Yes, that's them. Apparently they caused quite a scandal. Similar to, well," the woman looked embarrassed. "They've moved on now. Somewhere out of state, I heard." Sarah felt oddly numb at the news. They'd moved on to the next neighborhood, the next couple to seduce with promises of freedom, the next marriage to destabilize. Or maybe that was unfair. Maybe they were just living their truth, and it was up to others to decide how to respond to it. Maybe both things could be true. A year after the divorce, Sarah received an unexpected email from David. It was brief. "Sarah, I'm getting remarried. Jessica is wonderful. You'd actually like her. We met at work. I wanted you to hear it from me rather than through the neighborhood grapevine. I've done a lot of thinking this past year. I was angry for a long time and hurt. I felt like you threw away everything we built for something meaningless. But my therapist helped me see that people don't destroy good marriages for nothing. If what we had was so easily broken, maybe it wasn't as solid as I believed. I'm not saying what you did was okay. The lying, the betrayal, that hurt more than I can express. But I've come to understand that you were struggling with something, and instead of talking to me about it, you looked for answers elsewhere.
I wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me you were unhappy. Maybe we could have worked on it together. Maybe not. We'll never know. I hope you found what you were looking for. I hope you're at peace. I'm moving forward, and I hope you are too. Take care, David. Sarah read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of regret, exactly, though she had plenty of that, but tears of recognition. David was right. She'd been unhappy, restless, yearning for something undefined, and instead of doing the hard work of figuring out what she needed and communicating it honestly, she'd taken the easy path of escape and fantasy. Jen and Marcus hadn't ruined her marriage. Her inability to be honest, with David, with herself, had done that. She thought about that couple sometimes, wondered where they were now, if they were still together, still swimming in pools and hosting yoga classes and inviting people to shed their inhibitions. She didn't hate them. How could she? They'd been honest about who they were from the start. She was the one who'd lied. That evening, Sarah sat down and wrote a reply to David. David, congratulations on your engagement. I mean that sincerely. You deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved honesty and communication and a partner willing to do the hard work of maintaining a relationship. I was running from myself, and I ran right over you in the process. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but I am. More than I can say. I'm working on myself now, learning to be honest, to face my fears and desires head-on instead of hiding from them. It's harder than running away, but it's real in a way that my time next door never was. You're a good man. Jessica is lucky. I hope you build something beautiful together. And I hope you're right about moving forward. I'm trying. Be well, Sarah. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she opened her laptop and began writing, not an email, not work, but something personal. Her story, truthfully told, without evasion or excuse. Because maybe that was the real freedom Jen had talked about. Not the absence of rules or constraints, but the courage to be honest about who you are and what you want, even when that honesty is painful, even when it costs you everything you thought you needed. Sarah wrote late into the night, the words flowing like water, like tears, like truth finally released after being held back too long. She didn't know what would come next in her life, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was facing forward instead of looking for escape. And that, she thought, was a beginning worth building on.